Hi, Jamelle. How are you?
Hey, Justin, I'm doing pretty well.
I think today we're going to chat about immigration, which, as we're well aware, is I don't know, it's sort of interesting topic for DC, certainly much more so than the sequester discussion.
I think most things are more interesting than the sequester, honestly.
That's fair. That's definitely fair. I know from I suppose, the vain perspective, writing about the sequester is an awesome way to receive absolutely no traffic. So I think the public is speaking on that. They're
Right.
interested, they're checking out, but immigration is certainly much more interesting, especially since the last real round of reform failed so badly under Bush.
Right. Though interestingly, I think we see all the current immigration proposals, or at least the outlines of proposals, are kind of just variations on what Bush proposed. Which I think speaks to the fact that, I remember thinking at the time that Bush's immigration framework it wasn't bad.
No, I share your general feelings on that. I remember being just incredibly mystified why it failed and why it failed so dramatically. So to see it come back up, I have these premonitions that we're going to see the same thing happen again, but who knows? I hope to be proven wrong.
I think, whether or not the same thing happens again depends entirely on. I wouldn't say it depends entirely, but I think it depends a lot on how much Republicans see their political advantage in doing it. And I'm not sure. I've been writing about this a bunch. I'm not sure that there is much of a immediate political gain to be had from passing immigration reform. Like the kind of gains you would get, or a generic Republican could get from doing it. I think you would accrue those same gains by just adopting more conciliatory rhetoric about immigration and whatnot.
Perhaps I think one of the things I've come to see as I've looked about this more is that I initially suspected that there would be gains to be had by being restrictionist. That say there was an aggrieved working class, be that a Hispanic working class, a black working class, a white working class, and I figured that there might be an opening for Republicans there to say that we want to defend the level of your wages. We want to make sure that your jobs are being protected. The last few months have been, I suppose, the Wall Street side of the party has steamrolled that perspective. I don't think that's going to be the Republican line.
Yeah, which is a shame because I think, just thinking pure politics, I think that isn't a bad path to follow. Or at least if you're going to do immigration reform, which will sort of hew to that, you would have a reform bill that's much more restrictionist, that's much more punitive in sort of its requirements for undocumented immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
Because and this is something I kind of mentioned I think last week, but I haven't really explored it much. But that in terms of bang for buck, I'm not sure. I think Republicans would be better placed trying to shore up their working class support and expand it, particularly among African Americans, than they would gain from trying to win a chunk of Latino voters, just because Latino voters tend to be concentrated in places where either Republicans have a solid advantage, like Texas or Arizona,
or just a massive disadvantage. Yeah.
Right. Like
yeah.
Nevada, like Colorado, I wouldn't call a massive disadvantage, but a large enough one that I can't imagine the gains would be huge. California, whereas black voters are what make Florida and Virginia and Ohio,
North Carolina too.
North Carolina. This would make those states essentially purple. But I'm not a Republican, and I don't expect actual Republicans to agree with me here. But I think I'm right about this one. There's a lot more to gain from the GOP getting its percentage with black voters back up to 11 or 12%. Or if you're feeling optimistic, 13% a la Bob Dole. Which, funny, Bob Dole is like the high water mark for black support among Republicans.
I'm hesitant to endorse any kind of policy on the grounds that it might move our numbers, say, with Hispanics from the low 30s to the mid to high 40s. Especially for a policy decision as massive as this, looking at that and saying that we might be able to shave 500,000 votes one way or the other, it seems politically stupid, really, and also it seems terrible to think of in a policy direction.
That's true. Yeah.
I try to almost to avoid that discussion as much as possible within conservative circles because I don't think it's helpful. But I could be wrong. I probably will be proven wrong, so we'll see. We'll see there. But from I think a little bit broader perspective, I have to look at this what's being on the table right now and wonder if this big comprehensive omnibus approach is just going to result in absolute disaster. Especially when you look at the Senate, I think we'll see, in relatively near order, we've already seen Rubio sort of back off, but we'll see senators say, whoa, the White House will get involved when the push will be made, and I think we'll see if the filibuster reform is actually going to happen or not. There's much talk of how it died with Harry Reid's decision not to push through, but I suppose I would be incredibly surprised not to see 41 votes become available to put a hard filibuster on an option that included a path to citizenship for illegals.
Yeah.
But we will see there, and I think the path to citizenship is the only area of disagreement that you and I might have. There's a lot of good things I like about this immigration bill. I like the fact that, especially so that a couple weeks ago, that Majority Leader Cantor said, "Hey, let's include a DREAM Act." It was almost an anticlimactic moment, but it was a big moment for the GOP. It's one of those that as a young citizen I've thought is relentlessly stupid to try to punish kids for the actions of their parents.
Right.
And so that's a good thing to see happen. I prefer to see that happen on its own and pass it because I don't think that needs to be a remarkably controversial deal. But we'll see.
The same goes for proposals to expand the number of, I forget the exact kind of visa, but essentially visa for students, for people who are already in the country who are students. As well as sort of high-skill immigrants. I know when I was in college, I lived in the international dorm. And so most of my friends from college had to go back, since they had to go back to either their home countries or some of them moved to Canada, although they wanted to stay in the States.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which it's insane to me that you have this population of people who have come to the States for school, who often end up loving the States and wanting to stay, and are highly educated to boot, but can't.
Yeah, no, I think we'll agree there. I would prefer to. I think one option to make dramatically increasing the number of visas available for high skill is perhaps to just sell them, to auction them off. I think that's I imagine that if I were an immigrant attempting to get a visa, and if I was, especially say if I had a doctorate in engineering, I would be willing to bid $25,000, $30,000 and to accrue some debt in order to get legal status. I imagine it's something that could work out.
Yeah.
And we'll see. From in an ideal perspective, I would just say, well, if you graduate with like the president says, if you graduate with a doctorate, if you have an advanced degree, you have a green card. I think you might run into resistance there, so perhaps selling them would be an alternative that would work just as well.
Right.
But generally, no. Go
ahead.
More high-skilled people, the better. Those are jobs. Those people who are going to create jobs. They're going to start businesses. They're going to be successful. They're strivers. Why not?
Right. So I'm curious, what is your hesitation with the path to citizenship?
I suppose I'd have to preface that by saying that I do think it's very important that any bill produces legalization and creates a normal status for people who are already here. I don't think, like Romney said, that you're going to get self-deportation. I don't think that it's practical to attempt to round up what are between, I think, 11 and 13 million people, a substantial number of whom are not Hispanics.
Right.
There are a number of people here who overstay their visas from Europe, from Asia, people who you would otherwise have no clue were illegal immigrants. I don't see how you're going to get just the manpower to do it. It's an incredibly expensive venture. But B, I also don't see why we'd want to. It's inhumane. It's counter to the spirit of the I guess of America itself. But I also think that there is perhaps it's just me becoming old. It's just I don't think there's a great precedent to be set in saying that we're not only going to normalize your status, we're going to put you on a path. I think that if there was to be a path, I think I'd like it to be considerably longer than 8 years, I believe is the suggestion right now.
Right.
I prefer it to be something closer to 15 to 20. There should be a punishment attached. And yes, there will be fines, there will be a process itself, but I think it's important to stress that the act of overstaying a visa or the act of crossing a border without legal permission is a violation of the law. I don't want to see people thrown in jail for that, but I do think there should be the length to citizenship to become substantially longer.
Right.
So I suppose that's where I come down. But again, it's the same kind of deal. I want people who are in this country to have some sort of legal status because I want them to be able to use the police. I want them to be able to pay for the taxes they pay. I'd like them to be able to access some services for them. I just don't think it's tenable to keep that many people in the country long term without status. I especially don't want to become like a Germany, which brings in people and says, "Hey, you're never going to be citizens. Sorry."
Right.
I think there has to be some sort of a common ground found there between a quick path to citizenship versus a never. That just doesn't. That seems like a terrible idea to work out.
I guess 8 years seems like a long time to me as far as waiting a wait period before you can apply to be a citizen. And I think if there's I don't have this isn't something where I have a particularly strong opinion, but I do think that my general stance towards illegal border crossing is that it's maybe not that much worse than a speeding ticket. That I can't bring myself to get particularly upset with someone for crossing the border, especially if they're just trying to work or better their lives. So that's sort of my if I'm opposed to a longer waiting period to apply for citizenship, it's just because I don't see. This is one law that I'm not sure I'm particularly upset about people breaking. Not that I wouldn't say that I'm someone who is completely open borders. I do think it's important to have immigration laws and restrictions and kind of regulate the flow of people into the country. But given a status quo where the immigration system has been broken for a long time. It's never been particularly easy to come to this country. And so, given all those confluence of factors broken immigration system, a United States that wasn't particularly interested in enforcing its borders for a long time, I find it hard to begrudge. I'm not saying you're begrudging, but I'm saying I find it hard to support, a 15 or 20 year waiting period to get citizenship. It just seems like a long time to me, especially if you've been in this country. Let's say you've been in this country for 5 or 6 years without legal status. Then
Well, we can go back significantly further. I think I have some degree of empathy on the issue because I went to a small high school in a rural part of the state of Nebraska. I grew up with kids who were legal immigrants. I knew and cared about for example, their families and their parents. And there's a lot of friends of mine. Their parents have been in the United States illegally for 20-25 years. At this point, and kids who both came here as young children or who were born here and are citizens of the country. My tag with citizenship is that I suppose I would say to a certain extent, perhaps I do begrudge. I don't want to say that as a personal kind of petty thing, but
all right, no, I see what you're saying.
But coming into our country illegally, I think that's kind of an awesome thing to do. I think that if you really are going to strive and come to this country, and if you're going to take the risk of being smuggled into the United States, on a personal level, kind of a bravo. But on a bigger, broader scale, we're a nation of laws, and that's kind of one that you have to enforce. I don't want to say go home. I'm happy to say here's legal status. We're going to work this out. Pay your fines. Right. We're going to put you on a path. But I do think it needs to be longer.
So,
Go on.
go ahead.
So
No.
I think on the perspective of trying to find something that both works and recognizes that we have a major problem we need to fix, but also one that says that this won't be the last wave of illegal immigration. The next one, ones in the future, probably won't be from Mexico, a nation that has a rapidly improving economy that
Right.
eventually will figure out this drug war thing. It's going to stabilize, but there's going to be more. I mean, my boss thinks that one of the future waves will be from areas like Pakistan, which has a massive and growing population, has a terrible political system, has an economy that doesn't have much future. So there'll be future waves. There'll be ways to go about it. I want to try to finally perhaps set some kind of decent precedent that works and says we're going to have an immigration system that is effective and that is useful and fair, but also one that says that we do have the right to decide who does and does not come to our country,
Right.
and we do have a right to set some borders.
Absolutely. I mean, I think our differences here are more a matter of degree than kind. Because I think I agree with you on those basic principles. I just, and I'm uncertain that path to citizenship needs to be more. It's certainly more than a decade. 15 years is just a long time. that's if you can boil down my position, it's just like 15 years is a long time. And I think that if you pay fees, if you pay back taxes, if you learn what you need to learn, and wait for a decade, and I think that's plenty of time.
Your feelings on the mandatory English? How do you feel about that?
It's one of those things where in terms of like practical politics, I'm fine. If we wanna require immigrants to learn English as part of their as part of the requirements for citizenship, go ahead. I'm not terribly invested in saying that's unnecessary. But I guess if I were designing the process, I'm not sure. I would maybe I don't know, because like learning English is like a really broad thing. Does that mean being able to converse well in English? Does it mean sort of a certain amount of English proficiency in terms of navigating official documents or reading or even reading signs, getting around day to day? So if I were designing it, it might be something more in the lines of, can you get by day to day with your English skills?
That's interesting. I'm personally, I'm not sure. Like my mom's family came here from Germany and from Russia in the late 19th century, and I don't think that they learned English at all until the second generation.
Right.
And they got along just fine. The U.S. kind of, a lot of states banned the use of German during World War I as a response to, which kind of kicked it into process. But I do think I suppose in our modern economy, modern world, that there does need to be a fairly decent bar of a standard that you have to be reasonably proficient in English. As much for anything else, that it allows you to be more involved in the political dialogue. If someone is going to be a citizen, they should be able to watch. They should be able to participate in that political discussion without the need of a translator. And perhaps that's an unfair standard, and I don't know if it'll eventually matter, but it does seem to be something that you do need to be successful in.
Right. I mean, that
21st century America.
And I think that's right. I think the reason, if there's a reason to require learning English, it's really just for political and economic integration.
Mm-hmm.
That learning English opens the doors to upward mobility.
Mm-hmm.
Then again, I mean, it's sort of funny because then again, if you are an immigrant from Mumbai, and you don't have particularly strong English skills, you're probably going to pick them. You're going to learn them, right? Like people are pretty self-directed. But again, like I said, it's one of those things where, in terms of practical politics, if folks want to have an English requirement, then I'm not gonna disagree much. Because ultimately, I mean, this is one of those situations. I kind of feel similarly to immigration as I did to healthcare. That this is one of those situations where the status quo is so dysfunctional that simply adding rationality to the process, even if it comes with burdens or requirements I'm not necessarily comfortable with, is a big gain in of itself.
That's fair. Yeah, I understand that feeling.
It's sort of moving from terrible to sort of
less terrible,
mediocre or less terrible is a huge gain in terms of like, you know, welfare gains and sort of streamlined process and everything. That, for me at least, it's worth accepting. Not whatever things people attach to it, but like, you know, reasonable things people attach to it. No, actually, I wanted to ask you, just with regards to Rubio, who I think really is kind of the point person on all sides almost for this. Like, how much do you think he is interested in actually getting an immigration bill through Congress or through the Senate at least? Because he has like a weird incentive structure here, like working directly with the president to get something passed could harm his standing within the party, even if it's like even if it's policy-wise the smartest thing to do.
Sure. Okay. So I mean, it could be. Looking back at like the major legislative achievements of the last decade or two, I don't think it's necessarily a great political platform to have your name on one of those bills.
Yeah.
Didn't work out well it hasn't really worked out well for anybody for a while. I do think there would be a substantive achievement, and frankly, I mean, it would be a huge political, like a personal milestone to say I was the one who brought forth immigration reform. He's still a young guy. I mean, it could be that could be a career move if he was the one who got it pushed through and signed.
Right.
I initially thought that he'd get much more pushback than he has from Republicans, with the real exception of restrictionist groups like Numbers USA, like the Marco Rubio guys. Otherwise, the GOP's generally embraced him, and again, that's kind of another sign of the Wall Street Republicans defeating the Main Street Republicans. But that's generally he's been incredibly successful at this. But motivation-wise, I really can't speculate. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't think it will help him in a GOP primary. Just like I don't think the Mitt Romney passing Romneycare helped him in a GOP primary. But I don't think it's a deal breaker. I think it's something that if he had the correct perspective on in 2016 or 2020 or 2024, it could be quite helpful.
Right.
I mean, immigration seems to be the keys, I suppose, moderation idea of the GOP after the debacle of 2012. I don't think that's the best one to go for, but I suppose when you have Rush Limbaugh willing to say, okay, whatever, that's probably a good sign that that's what the GOP is going to be focusing on. Never mind the fact that they're missing unemployment, a stagnant economy, and they're about to let a sequester go through, and the immigration, it seems it is, and unless Obama really backs away on there are a few scenarios I can see where this entirely collapses. A would be that if the final legislation lacked serious enforcement provisions, if it wasn't to provide the border security, if it wasn't to provide the adequate E-Verify, I would be shocked if it went through a GOP Senate. Similar ago, I think there will be opposition to the path to citizenship being 8 years, and there might be path to citizenship at all. So I'm not sure how that will exactly play out.
Yeah.
But we'll know very quickly. I think the final thing could be just if the Senate is the Senate and just destroys it again, which is
very likely.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, it's at the same time I could see if that were to be the case of Harry Reid just ignoring the filibuster and saying let's go to a majority vote, which realistically he could do tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing people tend to miss about the filibuster is that it's not some constitutional rule. It's just a norm. It's something that other senators respect because they want to be able to use it when they're in the minority. And if the prize, I suppose, is good enough, there's no reason that Harry Reid might not just say enough. Here we go. Let's do this.
Right.
It'd be a new era for the Senate, but we're kind of in a new era, so we'll see.
Yeah, we've gone a little back and forth about this on Twitter, but I actually think that we probably agree more than we disagree with regards to the filibuster, because my basic position is that it's it's a good. I'm a huge apologist for like the structure of the American government. Like I'm not someone who thinks that we would be better off as a parliamentary system or
Bravo, sir. Bravo.
I'm a big apologist for the two political parties. I think there's a lot of value in having coalition building happen before. Like, I guess as a quick like a aside, people who push a multi-party system in the United States say, well, everyone will have a chance to be represented in Congress, but I think that kind of misreads how the American system works, right? That like disparate interest groups and constituencies already are represented within one of the two parties, and just the coalition forming happens in sort of the candidate selection process and an election process than it does versus after the fact. And I think there's a lot to say for a political system that has sort of forces interest in coalitions into coalition with each other, in the service of like broader policy goals. But with all of that said, I mean, I would like to essentially see the filibuster return to its former position as a rarely used tactic, reserved pretty much for huge matters. So, for instance, I don't think I have any like principled objection to the fact that a filibuster is used against the Affordable Care Act. I was annoyed, certainly, but no real principled objection there. If there's an objection, it's that I think it's unreasonable to have a filibuster on things, on sort of a motion to bring something to a vote. Filibustering a vote, sure, whatever, but
filibustering the vote to take a vote.
Right. That's just sort of absurd. I've explained this to people who aren't in politics, and they find it absurd. But
the Senate is its own animal. I mean, the filibuster. I don't think conservatives can wave around the filibuster without recognizing that Richard Russell from Georgia used it for 20 years to defeat the Civil Rights Act.
Right.
So that's one of those things that you have to. I think it historically has been used for some very terrible things. I think today it can be used for some very good things. It can, structured properly, it can be quite helpful for the Senate. I would personally favor raising the threshold to defeat the filibuster to 67 votes, but it also required senators to hold the floor. And I think it needs to be that you can only take the filibuster if you're willing to pay a very high price to do so. So you use it rarely. But I also want it to be there to force the majority to recognize that it might be used.
Right.
It's one of those that I don't think the filibuster should be used to forever, like that recent TNR cover story about the GOP being the party of Calhoun. I thought that was an interesting thing. I reacted to it and got pissed off, so I didn't write about it for like a week. But I think it offers an interesting perspective for the future, which is that you only adopt those tactics, which are really hold on, last stand tactics if you think that you're going to forever lose and that you're trying to stall that for as long as absolutely possible.
Right.
And that's what you do when you make the Senate what it is today. You make it so that it's going to be damn near impossible to pass something substantive and big. But you also get to the point where eventually, and especially in a Senate where the rules are norms and they're not enshrined in some written law, eventually that's all just going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And then you lose, and you don't just lose an election, you lose dramatically, and you lose in a massive fashion on a lot of issues that mean a great deal to your party, and that's how a party dies.
Right.
So that's I don't know. I've had a few long, loving chats with Norm Ornstein about the subject, so I think he's kind of won me on that topic.
I mean, I'm not sure. Like, what kind of what I'm not never sure about is how can you make using the filibuster costly, right? Because it's not as if, the public, and I just wrote about this for Greg Sargent at the Post, but the public doesn't really pay attention to congressional minutia. I think even with like a talking filibuster, the public isn't really going to notice. They're just going to look at whether there's gridlock and whether whether anything's getting done. And so even if you can sort of design a filibuster that exacts costs, like you have to talk, it's highly public. I can't think of any others.
I think you strip away a few things. The first that you do is, I think that you can only use the filibuster on a final vote. I think is a good way to look at it. You can't stop debate from occurring itself. It has to be allowed to be brought to the floor. And I do like the old school. I mean, like the kid who grew up in parliamentary procedure likes the idea of requiring the talking filibuster. But I also think another part of, I mean, for example, the best article written this year on the filibuster was Ezra's in the New Yorker.
Yeah.
Which, and one of the ideas in that is that the filibuster should be a positive thing. You should have to have 41 votes to force it.
Right.
And I would be just fine with requiring a certain number of those votes being present in the chamber at all times.
Yeah.
I think that's how you exact a cost. That's how you bring in the cots and say, let's do this. That's how you, especially in an era when people need to fundraise, when you have senators and congressmen who spend so much time having to go home, do constituent services, spend time on the phone with spend time on the phone with money people. That's how you exact the cost. That's how you make it so people who are aware of how much time they have to spend raising money aren't going to be able to do it. That's how you make the filibuster cost a lot.
Yeah. There's one proposal, and I forget who the proposal belongs to, but one that I've always liked was essentially you maintain the entire filibuster status quo except for one thing, and that is, as time goes on, the threshold for cloture drops. So let's say it's 67 votes. So, for the first, 30, 40, 50 hours is 67, and then it drops to 60, then it drops to, 55, then it drops to 51 over some predefined amount of time. That way you preserve, because again, it's sort of the spirit of the thing. If the spirit of the thing is to preserve debate, to allow for minority legislative coalitions or groups to voice their concerns, then why not, allow that, but then say you can't just indefinitely stall something just because you have a concern.
Do you know how that would handle amendments? That's a big concern for people against the filibuster reform.
Right. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Which is it's an intriguing idea. It strikes me that what the best response to that procedure-wise would be to simply introduce something, go relax for however long you need to get to the threshold to drop to majority vote, and then do it. It would be. Procedural reforms are tough because you have a lot of very smart people who are paid to think the ways around them, and it's the conservative in me thinks that you're just not going to be able to stay ahead of people on that. You're not going to be able to change the rules fast enough and be able to keep changing them fast enough to outwit a lot of very smart Machiavellian people.
Yeah, no.
And perhaps it's foolish to try, but I don't know. I have this nostalgia. I think every young American has this nostalgic view about Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, about the filibuster matters, how a principled stand against something can be done, and institutionally is defended. But I also can't think of a time in my lifetime when the filibuster was used in such a way.
Right.
And I don't foresee any time in the near future where that's going to be the case. And one of the really interesting things that I think that Jeff Merkley pointed out, it was a while back, it might have been like up with Chris, was that a lot of senators in his generation don't remember the filibuster like that. They don't remember it as something of good. They see it as a way of stalling everything. And eventually you're going to reach a critical mass when senators like Lautenberg retire and are done, when filibuster reform is going to become almost inevitable, and it's going to become, I suppose, not the nice kind of filibuster form that I would hope, but rather just that's it. It's enough. Majoritarian rule.
I should say, I don't think, for as much as I'm not sure I support completely getting rid of the filibuster, it's worth noting that even a filibusterless Senate isn't one that is purely majoritarian, right?
True. Yeah, certainly, because of the 6-year terms.
Right. 6-year terms, the entire committee system, the fact that there are just a variety of things individual senators can do to
get what they want.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so I would say that we're talking degrees here. It will be a more majoritarian.
Right.
So, no, we're not going to be. I don't think we're anywhere, despite the wonk blog people's dear hopes. I don't think we're anywhere close to a parliamentary system.
And again, I just don't think. I don't think necessarily that would serve the American
No, I don't think it would
the
either.
experience. Though, I mean, I don't know, because like, and this is like this, I guess, which is an entirely different territory of conversation. But if there is, like, the weakness of the way we structure things is that it's not really equipped to handle parliamentary style parties. Now, I do think it's sort of overstated the extent to which both parties are parliamentary style. I mean, there's still a fair amount of division and conflict within the parties. It's not, things aren't unanimous by any means, but they're more unanimous within parties than they've ever been. And so when it comes to things like a congressional check on presidential power, it's barring just indefinite divided government. It's hard to, like, that's something that we don't necessarily have when a single party controls Congress and the White House, or one chamber of Congress and the White House.
Certainly, yeah. Especially when there's a parliamentary system without a ceremonial head of state to kind of say, knock it off. I mean, that's the Brits have their system, and one of the reasons it works so well is because of tradition, and because there is the knowledge that the Queen can't exactly call the Prime Minister and say no, but that it's understood the Prime Minister is not some unitary executive like monolith who can do as he pleases.
Right.
Which is I've had a lot of chance to chuckle over the last few years when fellow conservatives have gone with the doom and gloom and said, "Oh my goodness, this is the end of American democracy. This is it. We've got a pretty tough system. We've withstood quite a bit. American democracy survived the Civil War. I mean, it cost a lot. It was bloody, but it got done.
Yeah.
And I think if we could survive that, if we survived, I mean, the tumult really of just the last 100 years, we're just fine. It's just right now we're kind of arguing in degrees. The argument's not, are we going to become a socialist state? The argument's, what kind of a capitalist state will we have?
Right.
And I'm pretty comfortable having that discussion.
Which, I mean, reminds me of another thing I wanted to ask you, which is, you said earlier that you think immigration might not be the right place for GOP reform efforts to focus. Where do you think Republicans ought to be directing their attention in terms of, like, reforming their agenda or approach to things for
the working class? So if there's one writer who people need to read right now, it's probably Ramesh Ponnuru.
Yeah.
It's the attitude that the Reagan Revolution, in my opinion, has been won. We don't have the tax rates of the 70s. We don't have the same problems. We have an American people who I wouldn't say are fine with less government, but who are comfortable with a little bit different of perspective. But cutting the top tax rate doesn't affect most people, and they aren't interested in that.
Right.
And they also probably don't care if we raise it. But there's area to be gained on pro-family policies, like cutting the payroll tax. There's areas to be gained on helping young people avoid crushing debt that prevents them from starting families. And these are things where I think the GOP can be quite helpful and will need to be in the future. And the Democrats need a GOP that's functional as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
This is why I'm so busily rooting on New England Republicans, because of their moderating force. We need them, and the sooner they begin to gain some leverage in the party, the sooner the doom and gloom caucus kind of becomes less important.
Right.
So, I don't think the answer is a top-down Karl Rove approach. I think it's just you just have to win elections. You have to be competitive, and the way you're competitive and the way you win elections is you appeal to what people want.
Right.
And what people want is not the same thing in 1980. So I'll probably write it's not 1980 anymore headline twice a week for the next 10 years, but eventually we'll get through. I hope it's in the direction of the Ponnuru caucus and not the Tea Party, but we'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it will be in the direction of the Tea Party just because the views the Tea Party represents just aren't, they're not representative throughout the electorate, right? That, like, most people, or at least the people who will be voting for the next 20 or 30 years, I wouldn't say they hold, like, liberal views. I mean, I don't think people are particularly ideological, so I wouldn't describe their views as liberal, but they do have concerns. They will be concerned about student debt. They will be concerned about mortgage debt. They'll be concerned about affording health care. They'll be concerned about stagnant wages. And I agree with you. I think those are all areas where the GOP can be very constructive, if it wants to be.
Well, it wants to be because it wants to win.
Right.
That's the beauty, I think, of the two-party system. That's where I'm going to stand with it, because the incentive is to win, and to win, you have to get votes. So it's eventually parties come around. I mean, the Democrats came around. They went through the 60s and 70s of whatever that was, of going off pretty sharply to the left, and then they came back and won. And a lot of the priorities they wanted in the 60s and 70s they're getting now, because they recognize that you have to appeal to what voters want.
Right.
And I think the GOP can recognize some of those same things by moderating and giving people what it wants. I mean, there's my old boss, Matt Lewis, wrote a pretty popular thing called the modernize, don't moderate. I would disagree with him. I'd flip that. I think we need to moderate. And we need to moderate in a way that appeals to young voters and in, I suppose, a substantive, not a tone manner.
Yeah.
So we're not going to see this in 2014, I don't think. And I would imagine the GOP will pick up seats in the House, and it'll pick up quite a few in the Senate as well. But that really doesn't mean much in 2016, as we learned in this last election. Midterms don't mean much, but it's easy to rally around the banner and say, "Oh goodness, extremism and defense of liberty is no vice. What's the Goldwater line?"
Yeah.
But I think eventually, if the GOP loses 3 straight presidential elections, that might be
that will definitely be the catalyst. Like that's that's so unusual that I would be really shocked if that didn't.
Precisely, when's the last time a major party lost 3 straight elections?
I mean, that would be the Democrats.
92.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I'm hopeful, and I hope that the answer isn't more Tea Party. It's because I don't think that that's a politically great answer, but also I just don't think it's good for the country. So
yeah.
Which is where at the end of the little shred of idealism in me that's what I hope is the correct answer.
Yeah.
But there we are. It should be. I'm intrigued to see where the immigration thing goes. I'm not going to say that I'm overly optimistic. I think that even if it fails, we've made decent progress. The DREAM Act now is inevitable. I don't see how the GOP goes back. Also, normalizing status I think is also inevitable. I don't see where we go back. It could fall apart on citizenship and enforcement, but I think that even if it does, 2014, I don't see how at least those things don't pass.
Yeah.
I hope it just passes now. I hope that we figure it out. I would prefer to see a longer path to citizenship, but I don't think at the expense of the DREAM Act, at the expense of more high-end visas, at the expense of normalizing people. I suppose my ideology is going to conflict with a rather pressing reality. So
yeah,
which is where we are. But it's been good.
Yeah.
So I hope to do this again.
Let's.
All right. Thank you much.
Bye.